Good evening. I'd like to call to order the regular council meeting of Wednesday, December 18th. It is 7 p.m. Before we go into the meeting, I wanted to mention that the Bounty public hearing that was scheduled for 6 o'clock tonight has been postponed to January 15th at 6 p.m. I think most people heard about it, but there were a few people that showed up. So we apologize if you didn't hear, and we'll see you on the 15th. So we have an agenda in front of us. I'd like to make a couple of changes. I'd like to move a few items around. 10.4, 10.8, and 10.9, we're going to move up under 10.1. Move as amended. Seconded. All those in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you, Eric. We have Eric Scott on our speaker here. So next is the minutes of the 7 p.m. regular council meeting of December 4th. I'd like a motion to adopt as presented. Moved. There's somebody second. Seconded. Any errors or omissions? All those in favor of adoption? Thank you. Item 7.1, minutes of the Advisory Planning Commission meeting of December 5th for receipt. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
Moving on to item 8.1. This is zoning amendment bylaw number 25-300, 2019 for 5770 Torito Holdings Limited. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded, all in favor of receipt? Thank you. And did staff want to say anything about this?
Thank you. It'll be very brief. This one is, of course, post-public hearing, and we are moving towards adoption. And we recommend at this point proceeding with both third reading and adoption. As there are no outstanding conditions of third reading, we can give both this evening, and we recommend adopting this bylaw amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions by council? All right, so we have two recommendations, that it be given third reading and that it be adopted.
Pardon me.
Would someone like to make that? Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
So let's move to the actual bylaw. So this is on page 22, item 8.1B, bylaw number 25-300, 2019, 5770 Torito Holdings Limited, being a bylaw to amend District of Sechelt zoning bylaw number 25, 1987. Would someone like to move third reading? Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And someone like to move adoption? Moved and seconded. Before we do adoption, any questions, comments? Okay, all in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
That's passed. Perfect. On to 8.2, Community Works Fund Reserve Establishment, bylaw number 588, 2019. This is on page 23. Motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And over to staff.
Thank you. Just once again, a short report. We've had 3 readings on this bylaw, and it's up tonight for final adoption. And so we're recommending final adoption.
Thank you. Would someone like to move the recommendation on page 23? Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you. And we'll move to the bylaw on page 27. This is District of Sechelt bylaw number 588, 2019, a bylaw to establish a reserve fund for the receipt of federal gas tax funds under the Community Works Fund Agreement for the District of Sechelt. And I'd look for someone to move adoption. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
8.3A, Planning and Development Procedures Amendment Bylaw 566-1, 2019, page 28. Motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And again, Director of, did you want to speak to this? Thank you.
Thank you. As you are aware, this has been in front of Council a number of times this fall, and This one received third reading at previous council, and amendments are now recommended for adoption. Thank you.
Thank you. So in other words, I don't have to come to you guys if it's just coming back for adoption unless we have questions. Got it. Would someone like to move the recommendation on page 28? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
And let's move to the bylaw. Starts on page 29. Item 8.3B, District of Sechelt Bylaw number 566-1, 2019, being a bylaw to amend District of Sechelt Planning and Development Procedures Bylaw number 566, 2018. And would someone like to move adoption? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
So we're going to move on to item 10.1. This is the deferred committee of the whole recommendation for the Bailey Road bollards. And first, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. So we have the recommendation, the report back from staff here. It said we requested that it be deferred, that staff be directed not to reinstall the bollards on Bailey Road, and that access remain in its current condition. And that recommendation was deferred to this meeting to allow for further public consultation. We did get further input. Is there anything council would like to say to this? Councillor McLean.
Yeah, so I just want to commend council for taking the time to receive a little more input. I'm glad that we heard from more people about this issue. So personally, where I stand is that this is a public road, and it should be able to be used by the public. There's a lot of history to this street since it was constructed, but the fact of the matter is that I'm at this table right now. Any vote can be reversed, and my vote goes towards a well-connected, efficient street network. We heard comments from residents concerned with safety, so we measured the impact of removing the bollards. That's a good measured approach. The traffic counts show that the street is no more unsafe than any other of our streets. It's a very typical street in Sechelt, and I see no reason why it should be treated separately and have it blocked off for exclusive benefits of nearby residents. The street is for everyone, and the bollard should remain down.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Rowe.
I just want to make a comment that most of the feedback I received since the Committee of the Whole meeting, both via email and in person, have been to leave the bollards out. And that will continue to be my stand. Thanks.
Would anybody else like to weigh in? All right, Councillor Scott, did you want to say anything?
No, I agree with the comments that have already been made. Everybody I've talked to has been wanting them to stay out as well.
Okay, so I'm going to go to corporate officer. We have the recommendation that's in the context background. Is that what we'd look to pass at this point then?
Yes, Your Worship, that's correct. That's actually recommendation number 4 from the November 27th COW meeting minutes. It was deferred, so now council can do as you wish with it, vote on it, amend it, do what you wish.
Okay, would someone like to make a recommendation? Councillor Toth, sorry.
I will move adoption on the recommendation number 4 from the November 27th, 2019 Committee of the Whole minutes.
That's that staff be directed not to reinstall the bollards on Bailey Road and that access remain in its current condition. Okay, is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded. Any other comments? All those in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
All right, we're going to move on to item 10.4. This is with regards to Team Wolverine Athletic Special Event Permit for Kinnickinnick Park, July 17th through 20th, 2020. Motion to receive the report. This is on page 87. Motion to receive the report. Moved. Seconded. All in favor? Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Council. Before you is the report regarding the application from Wolverine Athletics. As you know, the applications for a special event permit at Kinnickinnic Park involving the sports fields and the trails for July 17th to the 20th. The event's known as a Backyard Ultra, so I think you got the memo on how that race works. Every hour on the hour, someone runs 6.75 kilometers. The dropout rate increases incredibly after the first day. So the number of applicants that comes in drops significantly. They're expecting maybe 30 to 100 racers. So after the first day, I don't see a big impact. When assessing an application such as this, from a park standpoint, I've considered some of the impacts to the fields, the actual conditions of the fields, the field users, the trail conditions, the trail users, staff implications, as well as neighboring properties. And at this point, I don't see a reason to deny the application.
All right, any questions of Jamie? Councillor McLean.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Very thorough report, so thank you for this. I think it has all the details. And I look forward to inviting more people to Kinnickinnic Park.
So do they actually camp in the park?
Yeah, the reason we're here today is because of the policy under bylaw 116, which states in section 4B that no person shall remain in the park between the hours posted without the written permission of council. So that's why we're here. They are camping for up to the 3 days.
So if they weren't camping, they could get a special event permit through staff and it wouldn't have to come to council?
Exactly.
Okay. Any other questions of Jamie? Okay, so there's a recommendation. Someone like to make a recommendation? Janice? Sorry, Councillor Kuster?
I'll move recommendation number 1, endorse the above recommendation as presented.
So that council approve a special event permit for Team Wolverine Athletics in accordance with District of Sechelt bylaws. Seconder. Seconded. All those in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
Look forward to an event.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So item 10.8. So this is on page 180. First, a motion to receive the report on the 2020 Community Investment Program grants. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And Siobhan.
Thank you. So before you is a report on our 2020 CIP grants. These are the multi-year grants that we started back in 2017. You'll note from the recommendations that the committee this year did something a little bit unusual, which is that they've provided 2 sets of recommendations. The ones before you in the staff report are the recommendations, their preferred recommendations. However, that would require an increase in the budget from what the 2019 grant budget had been. And so being aware that this might not be possible, the grant committee did choose to put aside another set of recommendations if council was not prepared to increase the budget for 2020. And so that you were able to see how they would have allocated the funding if you're not willing to put forward an increase. So it also allows for the same amount of, approximately the same amount of money for our annual grants next year. So at the end of January next year, we'll have groups applying for their annual grants. And typically we have approximately $52,000 for those annual grants. The recommendations, as they are before you, would allow us to have $47,500 for the annual grants next year.
All right, any questions? Councillor McLean.
So just trying to understand the process behind the 2 proposals. I understand the second one has a total 2020 grant budget of $107,000.
Correct.
And that is equivalent to what we spent in 2019? And that's how that number how we came up with that number?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Any other questions? Councillor Rowe.
Well, I'll just make sort of a broader comment. As chair of the committee, this is a really tough committee to sit on. And so what we had before us were applications that were all pretty great. And so the question before us became, do we just score the applicants based on the criteria and then see where we land financially? Or do we didn't want to fall into a scenario where we're just approving the same organization year after year after year, and then there's no room for new. And I think that's sort of where we're coming to, because there's so many great organizations out there that are doing really great, valuable things. So that's how we came to the decision of, let's just score them and see where we land. And where we landed was, of course, spending more money than they did last year, potentially, on standing grants. But we don't want to do it at the cost of those annual grants. So we didn't want to have essentially $20,000 less for the annual grants, because those tend to be great projects as well. And so how we came to doing a second bunch of recommendations was just looking at the amount we were short or would potentially be short, and then shaving some money off of each applicant, because we felt that was the fair way to do things if we were not to receive an increase in budget. Does that make sense? Siobhan, do you have anything to add?
I would just add that one of the reasons for the increase is because one of our groups that we've been funding for a number of years now, the Community Resource Center, is going from asking for smaller project grants to asking for more substantial operating funding in order to help support their staff with increased staffing. So typically, a lot of the organizations that apply for our grants are asking for a similar amount year after year. There might be slight increases or slight changes. So that was one of the bigger jumps that we had, was with one particular organization. But otherwise, yes, that's the committee did feel strongly that all of these applications were warranted full funding, but that would also require a budget increase if we weren't going to then decrease next year's budget.
Okay, I had a question about the Community Resource Center. So I noticed you've got 22,000, this is 4.4 at the bottom of page 180. It's 22,000 in 2020, 18,000 in 2021, and 15,000 in 2022. So that's actually decreasing.
That's what they asked for.
That's what they asked for, okay.
Yeah.
That's unusual.
It's because they're building their program, and at the same time, they are anticipating being able to diversify their funding sources, but they know that it's going to take them at least a year to get there.
All right, so what would council like to recommend? Do you want to lead us off?
Well, I think you know where I stand. I think.
See if you've got support.
Well, being that the committee felt that all of these organizations provide excellent sources of support, entertainment, cultural and arts, they cover the spectrum. We wanted to support their ask. And so I would like, I'll put it on the floor that I would like to move recommendation 2, 3, and 4, I guess.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Councillor McLean. Yeah, Councillor McLean seconding. Any comments, Councillor McLean?
I'd just like to separate 4.1.
Okay, so you'd like to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, 7, and leave out 4.1 at this point?
That's correct.
Okay. Are you okay with that? At this point?
Sure.
Okay. So all are on the floor except 4.1. Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Thank you. And 4.1, Councilor McLean, speak to that.
Yep, 4.1, I'd like to make before I make a motion, the recommendation here is that they award a one-time grant. We have a process for awarding one-time grants, and that's the normal CIP grants. So I'd have a preference that this is considered in contrast with all of the other ones that apply, rather than part of this separate process for standing grants, which are multiple years. So it's just a fairness thing. I'd like to see us do whatever we can to get that same grant proposal, but put it into the regular process, and then you can compare it on a fair basis. So I'd like to move that we refer 4.1 to the CIP Grant Committee.
Does everybody understand what he's putting forward?
I-
Would you like to speak to that
so-
before we do this?
Staff did let committee know that if they felt strongly that an applicant was deserving of the funding, but that they didn't feel strongly that it warranted a multi-year agreement, that they could still award one-time funding without asking that group to come back again in the next process. It can go that way. We didn't feel that it was necessary to have them look at it in comparison to the other annual grants. So we did give the committee the opportunity to simply award it on a one-year basis.
Councilor McLean?
Is there something about this grant that makes it different than any other one-year grant? I see a recommendation that the committee considers it a one-year grant. It's on a similar scale as all the other one-year grants. So what makes this any different from any other one-year grant?
I'm trying to reach back into my memory, but I think what we're not wanting to encourage is small grants that don't really need it for operational purposes to apply for a standing grant just so they only have to do one application. So they don't have to apply every year. We're not looking to encourage that.
Right, but I think Councilor McLean's question is, given the committee didn't feel that this group was eligible for the multi-year grant, right? So they wouldn't have to come every year. Why award it now rather than in January when the others are awarded? Is there something that do they need it right away? Or could they wait? Like why bring it forward now? They wouldn't necessarily need to come and attend again, but their application would just be coming forward with the other group.
I think the thinking is that moving forward, we won't split the process again the way we did this year. The timing of it was not ideal, but it was done for reasons of trying to get it done before the existing agreements expired and while we still had our full committee. So in future years, the idea would be that it would be one application process, and an applicant could be applying for an annual grant or a multi-year grant. If they were applying for a multi-year grant, they would do as they did this year, which is do a 3-year budget projection. The committee then has the opportunity to either say yes to 1 year, yes to 2 years, yes to 3 years, based on how they feel, whether it's warranted. So in this case, we could have set it aside and said you're just going to have to wait until January. I think the committee just felt that there was no reason why they shouldn't be awarded the funding for the program. They just didn't feel that there was sufficient justification to award a multi-year agreement.
Okay, Councilor McLean.
Okay, I don't want to drag this on too long, but under this year's process, they were denied a standing grant. A one-year grant is not a standing grant. It's a one-year grant. So to have a fair process, they should be considered with the other one-year grants. I think it's simple as that. It's fair, and I hope staff can do what they can to make it easy on the organization.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor, we haven't got it seconded, that this one-time grant for the Coast Recital Society be deferred to the regular process and come back to us at that time. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded? Any other comments or questions? All those in favor of moving it to the regular process?
Aye.
Okay, that's passed. All right, so that will come back to us as part of that process. Thank you, and so let's move on to item 10.9, renewal of the lease for restorative justice, page 197. So first a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And back to Siobhan.
Okay. So before you is a request to renew the lease for the Restorative Justice Program of the Sunshine Coast. They are currently leasing an office space in Rockwood Lodge, and that lease agreement is coming to an end December 31st of this year. They requested a renewal of their lease, and to make sure that in future it's clear the full extent of this lease, we are asking that the 2 office spaces be included in the lease, as well as recognition of the complementary use of other community meeting rooms that they've had. Up until this point, the second office space and the complementary use of meeting rooms was not stated anywhere in the lease. It just was practice. So otherwise, it's essentially the same lease as what they've had before.
Yes, Councillor Toth.
Almost. When they were here a couple meetings ago and we were talking to them about their financials and the contributions they received from the various government partners, was the value of the lease at that time included in their financials? Do you know?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're referring to in terms of the meeting that...
Sorry, I'm thinking the wrong organization.
Okay.
Apologies.
Okay, Councillor McLean.
So would there be a limit to how much they can use these spaces?
It's not quite written that way. The limitation would be based on availability, and so they will have to work with our facilities booking staff to ensure that there is actually availability on the days and times that they're requesting, and staff would do their best to accommodate if possible, but knowing that it might not always work. So we didn't put a limit on it. We did consider potentially putting a limit of a number of days or hours, but we thought this way it allowed a little bit more flexibility on both parties so that we could do the best we can to accommodate them.
So typically for restorative justice, these are last-minute bookings, are they not? Or fairly
not
last
always.
minute? No,
So,
but
yeah,
a lot of
so
times, because
they have
they're
some
referrals.
regular ones, like they have like regular board meeting ones that they could set in advance. But the referrals from RCMP, they can be last minute. They don't necessarily know when they're going to come up, and the number of them fluctuates from year to year.
All right. Any other questions? Councillor McLean?
This is more of a general question about Rockwood. They're currently leasing 2 offices. How many other offices do we have, and are they currently vacant?
All the other ones are currently vacant, and we have
I want to say 6.
6, I believe. No? Oh. Okay.
I hope we can fill those at some point.
All right, any other questions? Would someone like to make a recommendation? Councillor Toth.
I will move recommendation 2, that council authorize the signatories of the District of Sechelt to execute the lease agreement with the Restorative Justice Program of the Sunshine Coast as attached to this report.
Is there a seconder? Seconded? Any other comments or questions? All those in favor? Oh, sorry, you have a question? Councillor McLean.
Yeah, no. I got one more comment. I am concerned about this essentially unlimited use of our space. I don't think that's good practice. I think there should be a cap. We can work out something that can be generous, but I don't want to write a blank check to anyone. This space does have costs, and it could be abused. I know the people at Restorative Justice are really good and fair people, but I think if we are signing a contract, it shouldn't have any unlimited provisions. It should have a cap. I see last year they used $4,656 worth of space. That has value. So I would prefer if we set a number that they could use. And I think where we stand on motions right now is we're endorsing the current one.
Yes, as attached.
Yes. Yeah, okay, so I am gonna make an amendment that staff work with Restorative Justice to set a fixed number on the contract for rental.
Okay, that's a recommendation. Is there a seconder for that? Seconder? For the sake of discussion, Councillor Toth is seconding. Okay. Any comments then? Okay, I'll speak to this. Restorative Justice works with the RCMP, providing services to the Sunshine Coast as an alternative to somebody going to jail or whatever. So it's working with our justice system for alternatives to bring both the victims and the perpetrator together. They don't necessarily know how many times they're going to be needing the space because they don't know how many times they're going to be called upon. And if we put a limit on this, it could be that we'll get partway through the year and then they can't actually provide the service because they won't have a space to do it. So I'm not in favor of limiting it. I do agree that we need to keep track of this, and this is something that, you know, we can revisit, but I'm not in favor of limiting the number of times that they have access. If the space is available, nobody else has booked it, then I think it's a service that we can provide to them in the community. Anybody else?
I agree with Mayor Seegers. I think they are a value to our community, and I don't think we need to limit them, especially since we don't know exactly what you said, when they're going to need the space. So I'll not be supporting Councillor McLean's
Amendment? Okay. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak to this? Councillor Rowe.
Just a question for Councillor McLean. So are you speaking of the district, like the community facility space or the office space, or both?
Community accessible space, not the office. I understand they lease it, so they have unlimited use of that space. Exclusive use.
I can't see it unless we know that we're actually losing revenue because they are using it, and I think that's something that staff can track. I'm not really in support of putting a limit on it without knowing that it's an issue in the first place, to be honest.
Okay, any other comments? So we have amendment on the floor. Indication of who's in favor of the amendment. Okay, and who's opposed? Thank you.
Aye.
That's defeated. So the motion that's on the floor is that council authorize the signatories of the District of Sechelt to execute the lease agreement with the Restorative Justice Program of the Sunshine Coast as attached to this report. All those in favor? Thank
Aye.
you. That's passed. Thank you. So we're going to move back to item 10.2 on page 37. So this is Larry Nygaard Development Variance Permit. Motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor of receipt? Thank you. And I believe you do want to speak to this one.
Yes, thank you. This is a development variance permit for construction of an addition to a house, a single-family dwelling located on Sunshine Coast Highway 5207, I believe, just close to Snodgrass Road in Selma Park. Largely, this area is high bank waterfront, and some of the properties, including this one, it's a lower at the foot of the slope house. The owner, the designer, and builder did apply for variances in the year 2000. 19 years later, some of that work hasn't been done. Although it was acknowledged in the year 2000 that some of the construction would be on the upper floor within the setback, it wasn't expressly written into the variance permit. And my interpretation of that is through case study, through evolving legislation and how we interpret it, I believe in the year 2000 it was just simply deemed that the building was non-conforming because there was already a building there. However, it is new mass on the additional level, and so how we interpret that now is it would require a variance to proceed as well. So the variance is somewhat minor. There are some images on page 39 of the agenda which show the proposed addition area highlighted in yellow. Planning staff have reviewed this with the applicants. We do support the application as noted, somewhat minor. It's been considered by the Advisory Planning Commission, who do support it as well, and we have not received any comment from our notification process, and therefore at this time staff are recommending support of issuance of this development variance permit. Thank you.
Any questions? All right, so we have a recommendation. Page 37. Would someone, Councillor McLean, you'd like to make recommendation number 2?
Recommendation 2, that council approve development variance permit 2019-05 at 5207 Sunshine Coast Highway.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. Any other comments or questions? All those in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
So 10.3, District of Sechelt logo. So, District of Sechelt logo and brand, first a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded, all in favor of receipt? Thank you. And Ms. Rogers, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you, Your Worship. This is the District of Sechelt corporate logo as approved by the Sechelt Council in March of 2013. The process to get this logo was a community contest. They had just over 80 entrants. A committee, I don't know how the committee was selected, but there was a committee that found 3 winners. And then a local person, not a graphic designer, created a whole bunch of, apparently hundreds of composites where they took the 3 winners and tried to take elements of each and created quite a few options. And then this is the one that council ultimately selected for the District of Sechelt. So the council approved this. On March the 15th, 2013, if I could quote the Coast Reporter, the District of Sechelt's new logo was unveiled to boos and angry comments from the audience gathered at the March 6th regular council meeting. The wavy lines in the logo represent the land between 2 waters, which was the original tagline for Sechelt, and land between 2 waters is also the literal meaning of the First Nation word Sechelt. I think we know that there is no First Nation word Sechelt, and in fact, there is no word in the Shishal language that means land between 2 waters. We don't know where that came from. So I tell you this because there was a process for this logo. It didn't go well. So now the community, or a community group, has created a community brand and a community logo. And I'm just going to talk about the logo right now. I won't get into the whole brand. But this process was a 6-week graffiti wall project where all of our citizens of all ages and our tourists were asked to say what they love about Sechelt. And then that formed the basis for the brand that a group of professionals volunteered their time to develop the brand, and then from the brand worked with a team of 3 graphic designers to create, based on the brand, this logo for the community. There's now a small group of brand champions that are moving the brand forward from there. The colors in this design are based on Sunshine Coast Tourism's colors, and this logo works really well in a lot of different elements. If you think about your logo, it goes on your lapel, it goes on a button, it goes on a little tiny pin, it goes on the side of a truck, it goes on a street banner. So you try to think about all of the uses for the logo and how it will translate. This logo doesn't work really well in a lot of different ways. Graphically, I don't want to get into the technicalities of the graphics, but in terms of, design, proximity, alignment, contrast, it violates a lot of rules, and it doesn't work well for like a city pin, for example. This does, and that's why it was designed by graphic designers, so that it would translate. So further to the motion from council back in October to come back with some more options. I think the motion that I put in my report says 6 options, but after I wrote the report, they threw a few more at me. And so to try to make it based on the brand, as was stated in the council resolution, we tried to come up with some options that would still translate well to the side of a truck or a city pin or a street banner, or your Facebook profile image or your Twitter profile image. So these are pretty good. I have my own opinions. These ones I really like. My only concern is that the S, if it's in a little tiny pin, might not be as nice, although on the side of a truck, really awesome. So as you're looking at the logos, if you're thinking about changing logos, think about those kinds of things as well. I thought these were boring, but they're an option as well. They're simply because they're using some of the same fonts and the same colors, so it is still consistent with the brand. Some more options. These ones I think would be awesome on a pin. And as you're thinking about it too, like the blue around the S might be too much blue, and so would you do white around the S and then blue on the outside, or green on the outside? So you can mess around with that as well if you think about how it would translate. But those are the options before you. And I recognize that when it comes to artwork and colors, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny on social media. I'm not surprised that a handful of people have spoken out against it, because it's subjective. It is subjective. It's not going to be popular with everyone. But it's every brand launch has colors and shapes and images that you want to work well with the platforms that you're going to be using. And that's a really important factor to consider. And the stakeholders involved in this project are still very strong supporters of this project and the brand and the logo, such as the Downtown Business Association and Sunshine Coast Tourism. So I will leave that to you. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But it's up to you to decide where you want to go next.
Okay, I'm going to make some points before we go to discussion. So we've been getting some emails over the last while from some community members and community groups that saying that there was no community input into the community brand. That's incorrect. There was community input. The list of the community members is included in the branding document in the agenda that's in today's meeting. And this is a district initiative. So we get to say who is on the community committee, not the general public, and not the community groups. We also get to say what the engagement looks like. Just because a certain person or their group weren't asked for their input, it does not mean that there was no community engagement or input. And right now, we've got the community weighing in on the District of Sechelt logo. And most indicate they want to keep the current one. Well, as you indicated, and I was there, when the current logo was brought forward a few years back, there was a huge community outcry, and people said they didn't like it. So it's amazing how it's grown on them. So what we're considering tonight is the corporate logo. It's the one for the District of Sechelt. It's going to be used by the District of Sechelt, not other community groups. It's going to be used for corporate purposes. So it's actually not up for community debate. It's a decision of council as the board of the corporation. So the question for us to answer tonight is, do we want to be a part of the community brand, which has a stated goal of improving economic development in Sechelt, or not? Do we want to get on board with the community or not? That's the question we're being asked to deliberate on tonight. Not whether or not the community likes it or if they've had input. So, what would council like to say? Councillor Toth.
And here I thought I was the only one that wrote a speech. As I was preparing for the meeting tonight, I was leaning towards voting not to change the logo. I was of the belief that it was not a valuable use of our efforts and energies when we've got so many other things going on in the community. I've heard from people who love the logo as well as people who hate the logo. Based on the people that I've spoken to, it seems to be fairly evenly split. And to me, that was a problem. I decided to look up the history of the current logo, and including that same Ghost Reporter article from 2013. Booed and heckled in a public forum. People absolutely hated it. They called it boring, uninspired, and said that the previous logo to that was way better. Those are all things I've heard from people on the idea of changing the logo this time around as well. I like the bacon and eggs logo, as you've modified it after you've got here. A lot. Somebody referred to the sun as a taco shell, but I still like it. The district seems to change the logo way more often than I think we've got any right to do, and I hate the idea of continuing that trend. If we had been asked at the outset if we wanted to change the logo, I probably would have voted no. However, the money and energy has already been spent to develop it. It's now being used by people and organizations in the community, my own business included. There's no decision at this table that we can make as a council that would possibly appease everybody in this particular case, yet we need to make a decision here. With that, I'd like to suggest that we actually adopt option 2 for the District of Sechelt. It's the only one that really speaks to me with the scripted font. I'm sure from a design perspective it has its flaws, but I'm interested to hear what others have to say.
Councillor McLean.
So I also prepared a speech. But first I want to address a comment by Mayor Seegers about community consultation. We can set however much community consultation we want. That's a council decision. I disagree with some of the reasons that you state for it. I think a really big thing about doing community consultation on something like this is you get a design by committee, that's in air quotes, and you come up with something bland. So no offense to the designers, I think if we brought more and more people in, it just takes a lot out of it, and we end up with something like option 6. There's nothing wrong with option 6, but it doesn't say anything. It doesn't portray a brand for our community. And that's what happens when you try to appease the majority. You lose the essence of what you're doing. So I'm in support of the process that we went through. It was a small group. It was representative from different corners of the community. It didn't have everyone in it. If we had everyone in it, we would never come to a decision that makes any kind of statement. So I think the process that we went through is generally a good one. Now, us at this table have a decision to make, and I'm going to go back to my actual speech. Sorry about this, but here we go. Branding's an important tool when we talk about what we're doing. A brand is the perceptions that residents, investors, visitors, and the rest of the world have of us. We need an active investment and use of our brand to build this perception in a positive light. A cohesive and well-executed brand makes all of our communication more effective. We have the literal message that is the heart of the Sunshine Coast, and we have the visual message of the sun, the mountains, and the water. These elements can be incorporated into everything we are putting out to the world, and we can build that perception that the world has of us. Our perception of us to the world is one of the strongest economic development tools that we have available, and we need a good brand to capitalize on that. I don't believe that it's possible to build and invest in a strong brand with our current logo. There's too much empty space in our current logo. It gets lost on every single background that is not white, and the color scheme is not conducive to incorporate elements from it elsewhere. And there's no slogan. We're not actively pushing a branded image of our community, and our logo doesn't make much of a statement. We could try and save this brand associated with this logo, but I think we could be a lot more effective by adopting a new logo and associated brand with that logo. Our goal should be to promote our community to the world, and one of these logos will be, and the brand will be our baseline. It will take continual investment and attention in our communications to stay on brand. But if we build our brand over several years, I believe that Sechelt will have a better perception from everyone who knows our name.
Okay, anybody else want to weigh in on this one? What Matt said, okay. Anybody else?
I'll just make a comment that probably one of the biggest things that's surprised me since October 20th, 2018, is the degree to which people can despise things that to me actually don't affect how I get through my day, how I do my job, how I raise my family, how I choose my volunteer work. This makes no difference to my day. And I am absolutely astounded. It's not just this issue, it's been others. It's probably been my biggest aha moment. So I agree with both what Councillor McLean and Toth have said. I've been very somewhat torn on the issue because there a fair amount of people have spoken to me in both ways, but you know, I'm always concerned when people feel like they haven't been heard. This was a process, if I'm not mistaken, well, I'm sure I'm not mistaken, was started by last council. I can remember writing on the graffiti wall myself, understanding the full intention of what the committee was looking for. And for me, that was my time to, I consider that my community consultation. What does Sechelt mean to me? I wrote it up there, and if enough, you know, if it fell within what everyone else was saying, it would be represented. So that's just my comments on the topic. And between logos and bollards, I've had my first migraine in a year today.
Anybody else want to weigh in? Councillor Kuster.
Oh boy, this is a tough one for me. I think I voted no last time, and I'm gonna, even though I understand and I in somewhat agree with some of your points, I like, as Alton said, I like our bacon and eggs logo. I'm used to it. I just think there's a cost associated with moving forward with a logo, and for me that is not a priority, and so I don't think I can support it.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb and Councillor Scott, do either of you want to say anything? You don't have to. Tom hasn't talked all night?
Oh, it's Eric here.
Okay, Eric.
I have to just comment. I agree. It's a logo. It doesn't run my life. I don't see the need to spend money on stuff like this. I don't dislike the old logo. It works just fine for what we need to do. I think we have other priorities that we need to focus on and work on. And for me, I think I'm not going to support any change to what we have.
Okay. Excuse me, Pam. Councillor Lamb, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I was on the council last time when they changed to the sun over the ocean and land, and it's kind of fun being part of that because there was a lot of controversy, but there was a lot of people that put a lot of good effort into it, and it was a nice change from what we had. But I think that with this new logo now, there's been a lot of effort put into it, and I believe we have to just move on, get on with what we're doing. So thank you.
Councillor McLean.
I'm going to jump in with a question. I heard concerns about cost, but I don't see a decision in front of us regarding cost. Will that come through our budget process?
No. Well, sort of. The communications department has an annual budget for advertising supplies, contracted graphic design services, things like that. And the costs for moving forward is so small. I thought I could just work within my current budget. We didn't do very much community consultation this year, so I didn't spend all of my money in my budget this year. So I'm not going to ask for an increase in my budget next year, and I can work this into what I already have, assuming we don't go wild and do all kinds of community consultation every 2 weeks where I'm advertising like crazy. I think I can figure it out.
And another piece, people tend to think that it does cost a lot, but we don't actually have letterhead or envelopes. That kind of stuff is just printed as we need it. It's a digital.
Just about everything that we have is digital. We do have envelopes. When we went with the last logo in 2013, there must have been a sale because we have boxes and boxes and boxes of envelopes, and we're going to continue to use those. I think because right now in the community we've got like our beach access signs and no parking signs and bylaw signs that have our logo on them. We can you put stickers on top. It's fairly inexpensive. Even the vehicles, the cost that I was given to do our vehicles is tiny because as the nice man that I spoke to said, he said, I'm not planning to pay off my mortgage by decaling your trucks. It's like $100 a truck. So it's not terribly expensive for us. And it would be really nice to do it. I mean, as you've said, there have been a number of logos over the last couple of decades. And every time the district gets a new logo, the plan is to transition to it slowly. So there are 4 logos in our community right now. It would be nice to have the same one on all of our signs. It's just my little bit of anal retentiveness.
Okay, so we could go forward a couple of ways. I mean, I think do we want to debate around this table which logo to pick? Or do we, I mean, we can, or we can just turn it over to staff and say, move ahead or not with a new logo and just let them go forward with it. Councillor Toth.
I just wanted to add, there are a lot of really bad logos for municipalities in this province. In tonight writing up stuff, I went and I Googled around looking for them, and there are some really bad ones out there. I'm okay with letting staff figure it out, but I for sure would like to strike option 6.
I agree. Option 6 is the one that's got the, just the text, on a colored background, Okay, Councillor McLean.
I see the intent of deferring it to staff, but I think this is the kind of decision that needs to be made at council at the end of the day. It's how we present ourselves to the world. But what may assist in this process, I notice there is no recommendation presented in this report. but perhaps staff may already have a recommendation that they can present verbally. If not, that's okay, but I thought I'd throw that question out there.
I think, I mean, there's some, I really love these. They're very pretty. And so if you're looking at it in terms of what looks really nice, I can give you my personal opinion on what looks really nice. But I think when you're looking at logos, what works best for the variety of different places we would put it, I think it's one of these. The beach access signs, the center is a circle. District pins, it would be nice to have a round one. Having said that, and also that really works very well for all of our social media platforms. So I think about it in terms of all of the different places that we use it. So since I got these drafts, every time I do anything with our logo on it, I think about, well, which one of these would I have picked for that? We just put our logo on the street banners, and we actually used our Facebook logo because the current district logo didn't work. It was too big, took up too much space. So I am partial to the circle ones for that reason. Having said that, if you really love this, we could put a box around it, right? Because if you're going to make a pin out of it, you're not going to make, your pin isn't going to be the outline of all of the letters. It would just be that on a white square. So, I mean, it is a little bit personal preference what you like, but it's also a little bit where it's going to be. And for where it's going to be, I think these work well. Although I would do white around the S to make the S pop out a bit better.
Councillor McLean?
I hate to say this, but we may need to come back with a white around the S. Because, yeah, I think I want to see us move forward on this. It has been a while. But like I said, I want to keep that final decision at the council table. I'm happy with a version close to option 8. But if the ones presented aren't quite there, I can't vote for them unless it's the final.
Okay, and I have to throw one more out. Option 5. I mean, I like 5 and 8 for different purposes. The bottom one with for on the trucks and on our letterhead, I think it would look really good. And then option 8 for things like pins and everything else. But I don't know if we would actually use 2. Councillor McLean.
Yeah, just to add to that, option 5 was my vote as well if I did have to pick one.
So, Julie, could we use 2? Or not? Would we use 1?
I'm more comfortable with 1. You get a letter in the mail, it's your tax bill. This is what's in the corner. I know for sure it's from the District of Sechelt, but a staff person showed up at my door and the lapel on their jacket has something else entirely. Is that a fraudster? We're the government, so I'm more comfortable with the government having a consistent look. I mean, you can switch it out as you need to and do a black and white version on your street banners, things like that. But ultimately, council can do whatever they want. But I'm more comfortable for the government to have one look.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Councillor Rowe.
I'm just wondering if we got it down to 2, whether you could bring it back with a picture of it on the side of a truck or as a banner on our Facebook. I'm way better at making decisions when I see the context in which it's going to be used.
Councillor McLean.
I like that. I want to make a motion.
Go ahead.
Merry Christmas.
I'll move that we direct staff to bring back options 5 and 8 with presentation within context.
Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded. Any other comments or questions? Any other numbers? Councillor
I'd
Todd?
like to add option 2 to that.
Okay, and I didn't like option 2 because it's hard to read the district of in the font from a distance. That's why I didn't pick that one. But option 2, recommendation. Councillor Lamb?
I would just like it to come back with a dollar value attached to what's it going to cost to put a decal on a truck.
That was actually in our previous report already.
Yeah.
That information's been presented, yeah.
Okay.
So we can send a reference to the report.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. Do you want to add option 2? Okay, option 2. Is there a seconder for adding option 2? Seconded. Okay, so we've got option 2, 5, and 8. Okay. Any other comments, questions, other ones to be added? No, that's it? Anything up there from Eric?
Oh, I'm good here.
Okay, so we have a recommendation on the floor. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Kuster and Councillor Scott, are you opposed?
Yeah.
Would you like those recorded?
Sure.
Okay, recorded, please. Thank you. All right, thank you, Julie. Moving on to item 10.5. Proposed cancellation of District of Sechelt Council, Committee of the Whole meeting of January 8th. This is item 10.5. This is on page 91. So a motion that the report from the corporate officer be received. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And anyone like to address the recommendation? Any questions, comments? Councillor McLean?
Given our conversation at the last Committee of the Whole meeting, we proposed using Committee of the Whole meetings for budget discussions. So removing one essentially tightens up our budget discussions a little bit. I recognize it's only one meeting, but I want to throw out the idea that we potentially schedule an extra Committee of the Whole at the end of January because we have an extra week without a meeting.
Okay, and did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that we weren't going to present anything from the budget at the January 8th meeting.
That wasn't anticipated in your schedule anyway.
That's correct.
Okay. So Councillor McLean, you're okay with not having another meeting then? Perfect. Would you like to make a recommendation? Thank you.
I'll move recommendation 2 that the January 8th, 2020 Committee of the Whole meeting be cancelled.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. And item 10.6. This is Blackcomb Airport lease extension and lot size. Motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And Mr. Curry, over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. My report today brings forward the recommendation that the district provide Blackcomb Helicopters a new lease starting on January 1st, 2020 for the length of 20 years with the option to renew for 2 additional terms at 5 years in length. The lease renewal started in 2017 with a report to Council this past October and another to the Committee of the Whole. Today's report includes the final draft of the lease, which incorporates all the recommended changes from the prior meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councillor Lamb?
So we have a lease with an established amount here, and then they pay property tax on top of that, do they not?
That's correct.
Right. Okay. And just do you know what that value is?
It's approximately $3,500 for 2019. That was based on the assessed values of the improvements before the new hangar was built. The new hangar received final occupancy in 2019 before October 31st, which should see an increase in the improvement, which should see the taxes go well above $5,000 going forward. per year. So they're going to see a tax increase based on them building the additional hangar.
Councillor Scott, did you have any comments on this one?
No, all my concerns have been addressed, so I'm good to move recommendation 2.
Okay, so that the request for a new Sechelt airport lease agreement from Blackcomb Helicopters be granted, and the mayor and corporate officer be authorized to execute the required airport lease agreement. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded? Any other comments or questions? All those in favor? Thank you. So item 10.7. This is the BC Air Access Grant application for 2020-2021. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved, seconded, all in favor of receipt? Thank you. And over to Mr. Curry again.
Thank you, Your Worship. My report today is recommending Council's support to pursue additional grant funding for the airport runway and to widen the scope of the project to include repaving the apron taxiway and funds to reinstate the airport lighting post-construction. For the project this year, we have completed the engineering designs for the runway to date, and through this process, we've discovered that the estimated cost for the 2019 for the project for repaving and extending the surface were higher than originally anticipated due to additional earthworks required to meet Transportation Canada standards that was identified through the engineer process. To pursue the project, we recommend realigning the capital projects funded by gas taxes currently outlined in the 2019 to 2023 financial plan. On page 113 of the agenda, I've included the gas tax projects from the financial plan, and on page 114, I've provided some proposed changes to realign the projects to ensure adequate funding is available for this project and others that may arise from the 2020 budget deliberations. The major project for Council to consider bumping is for Council to proceed. Sorry, I'm going to start again. The major project for Council to consider bumping for this project to proceed is the paving program for 2019-2020. This project is budgeted at $350,000. The paving program options for 2020 include funding from the General Capital Reserve, or Council could also reduce the scope, or could also consider delaying it a year to ensure there's gas tax funds to complete the runway project. I consulted with the airport grant administrator to discuss the options going forward, and they instructed me and actually recommended that we apply for further funding with the 2020 application. This deadline for the grant application is January 13th in the new year, so that's why we have brought this forward today. The other option for the district, which was proposed from the grant administrator, was that we could scale back the project by reducing the length of the runway extension to reduce the costs and to work within the current allotted budget. This process would require us amending the current grant agreement. So if Council did provide a resolution to direct staff to do so, it still would require the province and grant administrator agreeing to the amendment to scale back the runway. The risk of doing so could mean that the whole agreement is now in void, and we wouldn't receive the grant funds and the project wouldn't proceed. The following information, just to provide an idea of why we're here today to consider repaving the runway, was from a report in 2012 regarding the aerodrome infrastructure. The airport infrastructure, last updated in 1976, has reached or exceeded the end of its life cycle. Replacement of the runway surface is an immediate priority. Pavements have degraded to the point where an overlay of asphalt is not possible. Removal and replacement is the only acceptable option. Failure to do so could result in a Transport Canada declaring the airfield unsafe and causing it to be closed pending appropriate rehabilitation of the runway. The safety of the runway based on its condition was our priority and primary reason for applying for the grant. As an added bonus, there is the opportunity to extend at the same time, which would allow us to allow larger aircraft to land. Jen, could you pull that scale up? Just for context, I wanted to show, this is from a report from 2004 that we were provided as a guide for the runway length to the type of airplane that can come in. I find this helpful to see where we are right now at 2,400 feet. So you can see the DC-3, the third column there, is what we can currently accept. So the next steps, if we were to go another 700 feet, bringing us to the 3,500 mark, we're just going to be above the King Air for as far as which airplanes can come in. The engineers have designed it. If you go to, I just mentioned in my report here on page 112 that the runway will accommodate aircraft group number AGN-2 for landing and departing on the runway. This includes the King Air 100 and 200 and the Beech 1900. So you could see that we're really close to getting the Beechcraft 1900, but we're not quite there. So I just looked up their recommended runway. The takeoff length was 3,500 feet, so we're really close to getting it. But I had said in my report that we could accommodate 19 passenger services, which I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we'd still need to go another few hundred feet to get the 19 passenger services in, but we would accommodate the 8 passenger and the 13 and the 24 from the DC-3 if you look on the scale here. So that brings us here today with a recommendation that the district proceeds with a second grant application to complete the runway and the resurfacing project to include the 700-foot extension, repaving the runway, apron, taxiway, and adding the reinstatement of the lighting system. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councillor Toth?
I know that we identified work on the airport in our strategic plan, but I can't in good conscience vote for any option that's going to see us cut back on the paving program. Not now, not ever. We identified last year that we already weren't putting enough money into paving. And so I don't think we can cut back. If it means we have to phase the project or cut back on the project, then so be it.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Scott, did you have anything to say about this?
Yeah, I have to admit I'm really struggling with this too. It was very frustrating to come on board and go through that initial grant application where we had the understanding that it was going to be within that budget, and to find out that it's not. In looking at reducing the paving projects, I have a real hard time with that as well. But on the other hand, I also look at the leaseholders that are paying lease and taxes up at that airport, that they haven't seen any investment back in that infrastructure for just as long as a lot of the people have on their road structure. And it's that I recognize in what I know about that airport that it's not going to last another even 2 years before that runway gets closed. The pavement will have to be pulled and it'll become a gravel runway. And whether we feel that's okay or not, I struggle with that. I think we need to see if there's any other avenues for us to pull money. I think we need to take a look at the other governments on the Sunshine Coast that also have access and use of that airport and benefit from that airport being there, to maybe help in that contribution to make up that other shortfall of funding to go after the grant. I would like us to go after that grant anyway, in conjunction with working to see if we can pull some of those other funds. But I don't think I can support it pulling from our own gas tax for the other money.
Okay, Councillor McLean.
So I got my statement here, so let's go through that. I want to start with a quote from our June 19th council agenda. So I quote, "Through discussion with the Island Economic Trust, staff determined that because the district does not have an airport economic strategy, it is not ready to pursue the infrastructure funding grant opportunity and would likely be denied a grant from Island Economic Trust," end quote. So when we started this project, we were told that we could do the entire project with new external grants. Then in June, we were told that we need $347,000 worth of gas tax. Now we're being told that we need more. How long is this going to go on? Once we extend the runway, we may also need a new terminal building, more lights, more equipment, possibly more staff. So my big question is, what is our vision for this airport? I think some people may have a vision up in their heads, but that vision hasn't been shared with the entire community. And I don't know where the investment ends. A previous 2014 Intervistas report pegged the cost of improving the airport at $10.7 million. Is that what we're looking at here? How far does this go? I think we need to figure out what our plan is for the airport. Yeah, so I'm not willing to commit any further funds to the airport until we have a long-term plan for the development of the airport lands.
Okay, anybody else?
I'll just comment on Councillor McLean there. The airport committee is working through the strategic plan. Nobody on that committee would agree that the Intervistas report should have moved forward as it was presented, and I certainly don't agree that the Taj Mahal should have been moved forward. This needs to move forward in baby steps. It's really unfortunate that the condition of this runway matches the condition of our roads in Sechelt, where they weren't properly prepared when the asphalt was laid. And just like Sechelt Inlet Road was this summer, where we found all those issues, and the project was short, and we're seeing the same thing with this. There is significant economic benefit to having the airport there. Nobody's looking for mega aircraft to come in. It's just keep it going, add the medevac service. That needs to happen. So, like I say, I'm struggling with the extra money from the gas tax. I think we need to look for other funding sources. But I think the strategic plan is working in place. Nobody wants to build it right off the bat. It's got to be staged, and the airport committee will move forward with creating that strategic plan as well. But we need to start with something, because we don't have time to wait.
Okay, anybody else? Councillor Lamb?
So it would have been probably 6 or 7 years ago. There was a very aggressive airport committee, and I think they had a lot of good ideas, and they brought a lot of. It was the first time, I think, that people had really said, "Hey, you know what? There is a business case for the airport here," and you know, I'm not a pilot. I don't fly very much, but you know, it just seems like when we talk about the airport and we reach out to other communities to see what the advantage of expanding our airport, it always seems to come back positive, and the potential for maybe it's airline repairs or helicopter repairs or painting or whatever it is. It's a totally different infrastructure and different you know, companies that come to the coast. So it would be interesting for the present airport committee to see, maybe, I don't know if they've reached out to the committee of would have been 2014, to see if they, where they, you know, if they had if they did have much of a business case. But I know it was, I was up there and walking around with different people and the, you know, the potential that they, you know, that they were talking. It was it was a lot of fun to be walking up there. There's a lot of energy. And anyways, so for myself, I'd like to see the airport expanded, but at the same time, you know, we need to keep our dollars in our infrastructure in Sechelt. So,
Anybody else like to speak to this? Okay, I'll make some comments. Wait till everybody else says their stuff. Airports are recognized as an economic benefit to communities. Just before the election, I think, just before the election, just after the election, I met with one of the fellows who lives locally, who is, he was in charge of the inspectors of airports in Canada, lives locally. And he brought out his book, which they have a book as a pilot. I'm not a pilot, so he was bringing me this stuff. There's a book that has all the airports and the runways across Canada that they can go to. And he showed me all the airports in BC, and he'd highlighted, he put stickers on of all the ones that are shorter than us. There's not many. We're among one of the shorter ones in the province. And there's if we look around us, we look at Tofino, we look at Powell River, we look at Nanaimo, we look at Comox, we look at all of these small communities that have actually invested in their airports, and there have been huge economic benefits for them. The other piece with doing the 700 feet now, yes, it would have us decide on potentially some other capital investments, but doing the 700 feet now actually puts us at a place where we could potentially get some regularly scheduled service. Could be once every 2 days, it could be once a day. But once we do that, it actually puts us in a place where we can apply for other grants that are available through the federal government, because we have to have regularly scheduled service in order to qualify for those. If we don't do that 700 feet, we don't qualify. And we will come back and have to do this again. Another benefit of doing the 700 feet now and you know, expanding, doing all the work that needs to be happening up there is it actually opens us up to be able to have a little bigger company potentially come here, bring their equipment and actually do it, like bring their asphalt equipment, for example, and just do the runway. It brings it's that big a project to have them come here. Will it impact some of our other capital projects? Yes, it will. And we're never going to do all the capital projects that we'd love to have on our list. And we all have a wish list. We're not going to get all of them done. So we have to pick and choose where we go. And personally, I'm in favor of the airport. As we've indicated, in 2012, this runway was at a place where it was saying we need to get it done. I think it's time. So I'm in favor of doing this. I do realize that your recommendation here doesn't indicate which capital projects we would actually defer. Is that if we move the recommendation as presented here, are we saying that we are deferring as indicated in the report, or is that going to be coming up in our capital discussions that we look at that?
Yes and yes. You can provide the direction at this moment to realign the paving program. You can also defer the conversation until you have all the capital projects in front of you. This resolution would provide me the opportunity to apply for the grant. So that's the requirement for the January 13 deadline, and you could later discuss which projects you're going to move around. And still, at the opportunity that the grant is provided, we still have the agreement in front of us. So at any moment, if something else came up, you can still decide to, or direct us not to enter into the agreement and go back to perhaps the original grant application, or explore other options if you wanted to.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Toth and Councillor McLean.
Just a quick question. Does option 3 include the full 700 feet addition to the runway? Is that your intention? It would just drop off the apron and taxiway paving and lighting?
That's correct. So the original ask from the first application was for just the runway repaving, resurfacing, and the extension of 700 feet. And now we've added to the scope the apron, lighting, and taxiway. So the option 3 would be taking off apron, taxiway, and lighting as the extra items that were added.
Did you want to follow up on that?
No, go ahead.
Okay, Councillor McLean.
So as a follow-up to that, and then I still have a separate conversation. So we could remove those things under option 3, but my understanding is that we would still be over budget because of all the groundwork that we need to do. Is that correct?
That's correct. You with the extension of 700 feet, we'll still be well over the original budget. So the removing the apron and the taxiway would just reduce the complete scope of work, which would bring your costs down slightly.
And did you have another separate question? Yeah. And then I'm on the list.
I like the fairness. Okay. So in recommendation number 2, there is no mention of allocating our funds to this project. Do we need to do that before the grant is awarded, or can it be done later? And as a separate but related question, when will the public be able to know the costs that we are talking about here? Because it's kind of frustrating to discuss this without disclosing numbers because it is under tender.
When the tender closes, we can bring back a follow-up report if council would like that, and that could be as one of the first meetings in January or second meeting in January. We could summarize what the tender costs are. And what was your other question regarding the capital?
Sorry, I shouldn't do double barrel questions. Is there a need to allocate funds now, or can we just provide the instruction to apply to the grant at this time?
Yes, I'm getting a yes, you should allocate the funds now. Oh, sorry. Yes, just for the application, as I originally said, I just need a resolution that we apply for the grant today.
Okay. So, to Councillor Toth's question about the lighting, et cetera, lighting upgrade, if we do not do the lighting, then our airport cannot be used at night, correct?
That's correct. The final plan from the engineers had recommended removing the existing lighting. We did not have adequate budget to install the lighting at the standard that they required. So the second option was to add reflectors at a cost of $60,000 to $70,000. We've determined that reinstating the current lighting would cost $20,000 to $30,000, and we've added that to the new budget that we've proposed to go forward for the second grant, so that we could reinstate the existing lighting, and that would be adding the same lighting services on the extension.
So at this point, if we approve this, you apply, the tender closes, we get something coming forward from somebody who will be hopefully doing the project or looking to do the project, and then that information is all going to come back to us, and then we have to choose what we do with the capital funds, or where we get the capital funds from to meet the other piece. We don't know how much that is at this point because the tender is still open.
That's correct. Yes, we'd bring back the information. Once we have the final costs, we can bring it back to council, and it'll come up again with the capital planning as far as how and which capital projects are moved and realigned to different funding options or bumped to further years.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Toth?
Could a developer come forward and make this part of their CACs, funding some portion of this work?
The airport could be added to the amenity listing in the bylaw if we were to move ahead with establishing the bylaw. So then council could allocate the funds to the airport, yes.
Okay, just something for further discussion at some point.
Councillor McLean?
I feel like we need a motion on the table by now, unless anyone else wants to discuss stuff. Okay, so I have a motion that relates to option 3, but is slightly different, so I suspect there'll be debate. That staff reduce the scope of the project to fit within the proposed 2019 budget, and that staff work with the BC Air Access Program to develop new terms.
I'm not clear what your motion is.
Essentially, we have a budget. We figure out what we can do with that budget.
Is that what you're talking about? Recommendation 2?
Recommendation 2?
No, because that is essentially the full 4,000 feet runway. The full length. 700
feet, addition to what we have now, which is what, 3,100, 3,200?
I think you're looking at option 3, Councillor McLean. If you look at option 2, it proposes to reduce the length to bring the scope within the allotted budget.
Yeah, that's option 2. Okay. Yes.
Okay, is there a seconder for that one? There's a seconder. Any discussion? So you're looking at option 2?
Option 2, yes.
So that council choose not to submit a second grant application and direct staff to negotiate the current grant agreement and request a reduction to the scope by reducing the length of runway extension to fit within the current approved grant and allotted budget. Okay? I'll be voting against that. At this point, we don't know what the cost is going to come in at because it's out for tender. We don't know right now if our current grant will even cover the cost of what comes in. So I'm not going to support this at this point because I think there are too many variables still that are open to being firmed up. So I'm not going to vote again. I'm not going to vote in favor of that one. I would rather that we submit another grant, have the tender close, have whatever come in from whoever's looking to bid on this, so that we actually have some numbers to play with, and at that point, choose which direction we go. So I'm not in a place, I'm not comfortable right now saying, no, we're not going to move forward, because I don't know what that looks like. Okay, so I'm not going to support your motion. Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, it's Eric here. I agree with you. Based on what we have for our current budget, we can't even take care of the runway that we have without even extending it. So we do need those numbers to come in. We need to have a proper quote as to what it's going to take, and then we can look at reducing the scope of work based on what the quote comes in at. And again, we need to sit down and have a look at other funding sources for our portion of it. But let's apply for this grant as it sits, and then just hope that we can figure something else out on the funding.
Thank you. Councillor Kuster?
I agree with Councillor Scott and Mayor Seegers. I recognize that the airport is a valuable part of our community and could be a huge economic benefit. So I think we really need to have all those numbers in so we can make an educated decision. And why not apply for a grant for it and see where we come in at? So.
Okay. Anybody else like to weigh in? Councillor McLean?
I think it's slightly off topic, but I have no intention of furthering what we fund for the airport. We've committed this 300 something already from gas tax. That's as much as I want to fund for this project. So we could apply for a grant, but I have no intention of meeting that other 25%. So it's disingenuous to apply. So, but that's not the motion we're voting on.
Okay. Anybody else want to make a comment? Councillor Toth?
I agree 100% with Councillor McLean. Actually, I'm just going to leave it there.
Would anybody else like to make a comment on this motion that's on the floor? Okay, so the motion on the floor is that we not submit a second grant application, and we direct staff to negotiate the current grant agreement and request a reduction to the scope by reducing the length of runway, Corporate Officer.
Your worship, just a note that we didn't hear a seconder for that motion.
As a seconder, Councillor Toth seconded that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's that council choose not to submit a second grant application and direct staff to negotiate the current grant agreement and request a reduction to the scope by reducing the length of runway extension to fit within the current approved grant and allotted budget. So all those in favor of the motion on the floor? Okay, we have 2-4. All those opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so we're opposed to that. Is there another recommendation that one's defeated? Is there another recommendation that someone would like to make?
Well, I guess we need to work with recommendation 2 and to get the grant application moving to see if we can even get it. And we'll deal with the options once we get that application approved.
So would you like to make that recommendation?
Yeah, I'll move recommendation 2 and 3.
2 and 3. Is there a seconder? Seconded. Any other comments or questions? Alton?
Thank you. If we apply for this grant, and if we are successful in receiving this grant, and if we can't come to terms on which piggy bank we're going to raid for our portion of the matching funds, are we locked in, or do we have the ability to hand that grant back?
We have the opportunity to enter into the agreement. Once the grant's approved, then the agreement's in front of us. So we still have an opportunity to decline the agreement and not pursue the funds.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do we have the opportunity to scale it back?
Yes, you do, and it depends on what I learned from the first grant application. It depends on the terms of how the scope of the work. So they advised on being more general in the terms, so that if you, instead of saying we're extending to 700 feet and we're just extending, we could have just continued on with the extension as far as it would take us within the allotted budget. So without having to go back and open up the agreement, we could have completed the project and extended 200 feet. So yes, we have the option to negotiate the terms.
Thank you. Councillor McLean?
I see the approach that staff is trying to take with that, except when we apply for a grant, we specify a budget. And that specifies a commitment from us to fund that 25%. So if we don't want to fund that 25%, we can't reduce the scope of the grant because we want to fund less, can we? And then they give us less as well, proportionally?
Yes, it is. The way it's structured is they would, so if they approved you for $1 million up to that amount, like it's the lesser. So it's the way that you could reduce it, or council could reduce it based on our availability of gas tax funds or capital funds, to say, okay, well, we can only contribute 250,000. So then now the matching funds is 750,000. So you would have that opportunity, although they may have approved you for 1.5 million.
Any other questions or comments? So recommendation on the floor is that grant application be submitted to the BC Air Access Program to request a secondary stream of funding up to 75% of the cost of resurfacing the runway, apron, and taxiway, and extending the runway at the Sunshine Coast Regional Airport, as well that a copy of this report and letter requesting support be provided to Nicholas Simons, MLA, Hull River, Sunshine Coast. All those in favor? Any opposed? Would you like that recorded? Councillor McLean opposed. Thank you. Yes, sorry. Yes, Councillor Scott, did you?
I'm in favor.
You're in favor, okay, and Councillor Toth.
Can I make a fourth recommendation? That staff investigate additional grant options to fund our share.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you,
Aye.
Mr. Curry. You can breathe now. Yeah, he didn't run screaming and Have some fudge, just fudge in the room. Oh, you did? Okay. All right, moving on to item 10.10, page 209, zoning bylaw 580. This is on page 209, zoning bylaw 580 update and engagement plan. Motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Oh, you're going to come out front. Oh, okay. Okay.
So I will keep this relatively brief. I do have a few slides for the benefit of council and potentially for the benefit of the gallery as well to understand this project. So as council is aware, staff are presently working on putting together a new zoning bylaw to replace zoning bylaw 25, which was adopted in 1987. And at present, although it has no readings, we are calling it zoning bylaw 580. It was at one point in time, some years ago, referred to as bylaw 530. However, my understanding is moment in time had passed, many other bylaws were adopted, and the number has been refreshed. So the intent ultimately here is to replace the zoning bylaw we've had since Sechelt, shortly after Sechelt expanded from a village to a district when that zoning bylaw was adopted. And what we're trying to do here at this time is create a zoning bylaw that implements many of the policies from the official community plan, which now dates to 2011. So it's an interesting, the timing here is interesting. Both documents are a little bit old, but there are some good policies within the OCP, which is within, at 8 years or 9 years now, is within scope. Provincial average for an OCP is typically over 15 years with some reviews along the way. So what we're attempting to do here is create a zoning bylaw, regulatory zoning bylaw, rather than create a new official community plan. The feeling is if we put the zoning bylaw aside to dive into an official community plan, we will maintain our dated zoning bylaw for another several years. So ideally, we create a product, a zoning bylaw, which does not require amendments to the OCP. So there's pros and cons to that, but we feel that ultimately the intent is to modernize the zoning bylaw to put us in a position where we have relatively modern regulations and then move forward with, let's call it a midlife upgrade of the official community plan. So just a couple of slides about what is a zoning bylaw, what is an official community plan. They're similar, admittedly similar, and in some cases, official community plans have very regulatory-like statements. But essentially, a zoning is regulation. It provides a framework for the land use and the development that we have in the district. It has requirements for use and density of both land and of structures. So it's very objective. It's meant to be very black and white. Whereas an official community plan is a little bit more subjective. It contains policies, vision, objectives, etc. So the OCP creates a vision for the future for the district, and then it subsequently guides decisions on planning and land use management. So when we receive a development application, we look at both the zoning bylaw. Is it consistent with bylaw 25? If not, amendments are required. Is it consistent with the official community plan? And in some cases, it is consistent with the official community plan, but the zoning is not correct. And so the planning staff will make these evaluations prior to receiving application and determine best path forward. And so they have undoubtedly similarities, but differences as well. So with respect to land use within the municipality and servicing as well, the official community plan is a central document because zoning bylaws, development, subdivision servicing bylaws, building bylaws, etc., tie back to the OCP. The OCP is a guiding document, but in this case, this particular project pertains to the zoning bylaw. So as we are in the background, we're working on the zoning bylaw. Regulations are starting to take shape, but it is not a polished, finished document. But we have a sense of how we want it to look and the shape of it and the appeal. And we've identified the areas that we want further engagement on before we really dive into specifically detailed policies. But I'll give you a sense of how we intend on structuring it. The proposed structure here for the zoning bylaw is based on best practices. We've looked at dozens of zoning bylaws in British Columbia that tie back ultimately even beyond the OCP to the Local Government Act and what we are in fact able to regulate. It's also meant to provide clarity. A zoning bylaw, of course, would have definitions as well as administration and enforcement, interpretation, the real preamble parts to a zoning bylaw, how to use it, what do words mean. Case study shows that if you use different words to mean the same thing, the judge will infer you mean different things because you've used different words. So we really need to be careful about our interpretations and what we mean. General regulations, specific regulations. This refers to a number of topics. This can refer from urban agriculture to CCAN storage containers, specific regulations as well, home occupation, short-term rental. Zoning bylaws, even though we have a subdivision servicing bylaw which speaks to the servicing of property, there are subdivision regulations contained within zoning respecting density, potentially parcel size, other things such as hooked parcels, some real technical pieces that do belong in zoning. Parking regulations as well. And zoning can provide different parking regulations for different areas. There can be, in a more rural part of the district or a more suburban part of the district, could have different standards for use than, say, parking downtown, for example. And then part 9 would be the zones, the land use zones. That's the real heart of the zoning bylaw. The R1 zone, a basic residential, a C5 zone, a more intensive commercial. They'd all be described with the zone-specific regulations. In some cases, there's overlap, but nonetheless, each zone is unique. Oops, pardon me. And just highlights of some of the general and specific area regulations that we have talked about and are beginning to develop regulation on would be the home office, home-based business, urban agriculture for chickens, growing of food, selling of food in a residential setting, as well as creating a zone for the agricultural land reserve. At present, much of the ALR in District of Sechelt is zoned RR2. The RR2 is a rural residential resource zone. Albeit agriculture is permitted, it doesn't really expressly promote agriculture, and we want to clarify what the specific agricultural uses that are permitted by the Provincial Agricultural Land Commission. Short-term residential rental is another topic. We'll be tracking, observing what Regional District is doing, what Town of Gibson's is doing, finding areas for synergy, not just in short-term rental, but that's one that's forefront. But across the board, we're seeking opportunities for synergy when respecting definition of height, grade, etc., so that builders, developers, property owners can have an understanding of consistency on the Sunshine Coast while respecting our official community plan and it's the uniqueness that it offers. So there's a few pieces from the OCP that are really suggesting change. And one would be the village infill area. So that would be Mermaid, Dolphin, Medusa. One example that we've seen recently is the old daycare site owned by the Bethel Baptist Church. The zone we created and council recently adopted with the suite and the laneway home and so forth was based on policy contained within the OCP. Also residential zones. We're proposing an R1 zone, an R2 zone, R3 zone at the moment. And they would have different locational values. R3 would be downtown. R2 would likely be West Sechelt, for example, and sewer service areas. And the R1 would be in some of the some of the areas with larger parcel sizes, lower density. And I touched on the agriculture zone and the rural areas, some of the rural areas that transition into some type of light industrial Field Road area, for example, upper part of Field Road. So these are areas we'll be examining. And to show you a scale of zones, so the lighter the color, the lower the number is meant to indicate it's the base zone little bit darker as you get to R2, and then the R3 is showing here on this chart as being darker because it would provide for a little more density, perhaps some more tolerance for non-residential uses, limited neighborhood, commercial, possibly home-based business, etc. And then similarly with commercial, in this regard, C1 would be a neighborhood commercial, perhaps a convenience store, ranging through to C5, which would be the downtown area zoning, which allows for multi-story buildings and mixed uses and so forth. So that's how we're looking at it now. In bylaw 25, it hasn't been entirely consistent because bylaw 25 is as old as it is, and there's been at least 250 amendment requests, albeit not all approved, but many have. It becomes a little bit disorganized, and we're trying to create some patterns to establish a better zoning bylaw. And so we're, at the staff level, we're keen to get on with this. We've been working on it in the fall, but we realize that we can't simply draft a bylaw, put a bow on it, and say to council, we think this bylaw is great and we think it's perfect, because we know that that's not how engagement works, community-based decision-making, and so forth. So as I say, we're beginning to take shape, structure, and a format, but we took some stock in the last couple months and said, what are we going to do here? What's our plan for 2020 to make this a successful and achievable result to get this bylaw adopted? So again, I think I've touched on all of these thus far. What are the topic areas we want to speak to people about? You know, when we have engagement sessions, we're all ears. Let's talk about anything zoning. But do people want to talk about a 3-meter versus a 1.5-meter side yard setback and the impacts, or is that a little too dry? Can we get into talking about laneway houses and agricultural zones and downtown uses, things that might be a little bit more engaging, that might lead to the details further on? So this is the list of topics that we've considered. And so attached to the report on the agenda today is a summary of our engagement plan. We have a deeper engagement plan, but we provided, let's call it an executive summary. So we really plan, starting in January through the first quarter of 2020, to dive into some real engagement here rather than just working behind the scenes. And that would include council committees, housing committee, harbor committee, for example, advisory planning commission. That would include all of the neighborhood community associations, Downtown Business Association, Chamber of Commerce, the Voice Lab Group, etc. We can go to them. We can have centralized meetings. One of the ideas we had that came from a realtor was when they have their Tuesday tour, take the seaside, rent it for some time, put ourselves on the tour, they culminate their tour, they come and talk to us about zoning. So we're really looking at ideas that isn't just, here's our 80-page bylaw, please take 21 days and let us know what you think, right? You know, like, I'm presenting that as a possibility, but we really want to enhance this so that we can take the ideas that are feasible and suitable and put them into the draft. So how I see this happening is we're going to have all kinds of ideas. We're going to have some big ideas, I imagine, some of which would probably belong in the next iteration of the official community plan. So we have to help communicate to people how we can use their ideas. Is it right now for the zoning bylaw? Is it for the OCP, for example? And really show how we're going to use that information, show how we've heard it, and continue to work towards creating a zoning bylaw. So the goal would be to spend 3 months doing that and then have a document we can show to council in the second quarter of the year. So I stress goal, but but planning staff, along with Julie, you know, we've worked hard to create an engagement plan that we think is going to be successful, and I'm pleased to share an executive summary with you folks on the agenda tonight, and simply seek permission to proceed with this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor McLean.
Real quick one and then the real question. Just one key thing that I didn't see in the report. Will this need to go through a public hearing?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
I just
no
wanted
question.
that to be on the record that
Okay.
this will go through a public hearing as well.
Yes.
Real question. Given that the OCP is 8 years old now, and stuff has changed in the last 8 years. So particularly I'm thinking short-term rentals, something that wasn't much of, or was less of a concern then and is huge now. Are we going to be looking at stuff that the OCP may not be specific on right now, or does that get pushed back to the OCP discussion?
I think we can still include land use regulations, even if the OCP doesn't provide specific advice, because they are still zoning-based regulations. I guess what I'm saying is the zoning, or pardon me, this is the part of the problem is I mean to say OCP and say zoning bylaw, and then it gets even more confused. The OCP suggests the downtown, let's call them the 3 blocks of Mermaid, Dolphin, and Medusa, a residential infill, which is the house and the laneways and so forth. But if the engagement we get, hypothetically speaking, says, you know what, this should all be 4 stories. This should be huge density downtown stuff. That's beyond the scope of this. That's in the bucket of a future OCP. But simple regulatory pieces about how to use a house for short-term rental can still be included in the zoning bylaw. I know.
Yeah. Councillor Toth.
Thank you for this. I've been asking for backyard chickens since 2014, and I've always been told it's just around the corner. The irony is that right now I can have an unlimited number of beehives on my property, and there's not much that can be done about it. I just wanted to, say thank you for continuing to move this forward. We've been waiting this long. Don't feel rushed with the public engagement. If you need to take more time, that's okay.
Noted, and thank you.
Any other questions or comments? So, to your engagement piece, you will be posting something on the website. What? Just the overview, or what would it look like? Like how specific, given that you're wanting to go out and get feedback from the public?
Right. Well, we don't have a solid draft of a zoning bylaw that we'll be presenting. So I think what we'll be doing is presenting highlights, say social media blasts, print media updates. We're having a meeting. Let's have a meeting to talk about urban agriculture and chickens on Tuesday night. The following 2 weeks later, we're going to talk about the downtown residential densities, for example. So we might blast out advertisement for topic areas rather than come and talk about the zoning bylaw, right? For when we have the general public meetings, when we have our targeted meetings, if we're meeting with the West Sechelt Community Association, we'll take a look at our OCP and our possible zones and give them a area-specific presentation, for example.
Okay, I guess that's where I was going, because I know that the community associations are very interested in looking at what will it look like in their area and being able to give input based on that. So if you have that kind of, the specifics, that's what they're going to be looking for. Yeah. Councillor McLean?
Well, as a follow-up to that, what can some of these the stakeholders that you listed expect to see before they meet with staff? Anything, or will it all be presented at the workshop?
Excellent question. I think largely it might be reaching out to them and saying, we'd like to meet with you. Here's our general topic area. How can we best prep? How can we best help you to prep for this meeting? And put it out there to them as well. Again, for community associations, it's a little easier because we can focus on geographic areas. If we're meeting with the Ministry of Transportation, we'll be looking at key access points. If it's general public, come to the Seaside Center on Tuesday night, then we'll have, I envision, stations. Here's our area for urban agriculture. Here's an area for short-term residential. We can do a presentation and then have multiple planners or staff folks here conversant on these various topics. So there's a number of things we can do. What I would like to attempt to avoid is saying, here's 60 pages, right? So let's break it down into topic areas that are meaningful.
Yeah, so my intent is just to provide some of these stakeholders with an expectation of what they will be receiving. And I think need to flesh that out a little bit.
Yeah,
more.
absolutely. And as it relates to, let's say, the Housing Committee, for example, to which you are liaison for, when we're prepping that, we can say, here's what we're thinking towards housing, and work with yourself and the group before we actually arrive for a meeting.
How frequently should typically an OCP and or a zoning bylaw be reviewed and updated?
Well, the Local Government Act states that an official community plan should have housing policies for at least 5 years, but it doesn't actually say an OCP should be reviewed every 5 years. That's the common expectation. Because from my experience, the OCPs that I have written and worked on takes 2 to 3 years to start from a brand new working committee all the way through to the end. Is 1987 too long? Yes. But I recall that bylaw 530 was on the District of Sechelt website some 5 or 6 years ago. So it was close. So I would say in the 10-year range, approximately, for a community of our size.
Okay. I like the comment you said where you're looking at what other jurisdictions are doing. You know, as we know, a lot of people don't know which jurisdiction they actually live in. Developers do know where they're building typically, but we know that the regional district and the town of Gibson's right now are looking at short-term rental bylaws. And it would make it much easier for people if we had at least some consistency up and down the coast. So,
Yeah.
you know, kudos on that.
I can assure you, I can attest over the years working at regional district, somebody would phone and say, I live in Gibson's, but I'm in the Sechelt Regional District, and I don't know why. And they were in electoral area E, but because the regional district office was in Sechelt. So there's a lot of that, right? And frankly, why is height measured differently in Roberts Creek from Wilson Creek, right? These are things that we can find some synergies on, and we look forward to doing so.
Okay. Councillor Scott, did you have any comments on this one?
No, actually, it all looks good. I'm ready to move forward with it.
Okay, any other comments by council? So there's a recommendation. Councillor Toth?
I will move recommendation 2, that council endorse the engagement plan for proposed zoning bylaw 580 and grant permission to proceed.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. Let's go. It's a comment over here. All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you for the work you've been doing. All right, next, we're up with reports from councillors. I'm just going to throw it out there. Who wants to go first? Nobody? Councillor McLean.
Yeah, since I have it written down, I'll go first. I attended a funding announcement by the province for Work BC. The province provided $48,000 for the Jobs in Demand program to train 90 people. What I found interesting there was a need to support people transitioning to working on the coast. We don't have a lot of corporate jobs on the coast, so people with corporate experience kind of find themselves out of luck if they want to live on the coast. So Jobs in Demand can help with that. They can also help with parents who may have been away from the workforce for a while and getting back to the workforce of today. So a really valuable program, and it's nice to see that funding. We had a housing committee meeting, and at that meeting, we dialed in on focusing on promoting garden suites. So these are secondary dwellings, and the approach that we're going to take at the beginning is to work within existing rules. So look at what is possible now and what we can do to promote that. And we want to reach a little bit outside of the boundaries of Sechelt and look at what's possible in the SCRD and in Gibson's, and just promote, trying to get people to build those secondary suites within existing rules. The next stage will be advocating to make those changes, and that will go into our zoning discussion and such. But we want to get moving quickly, so we're looking to see how feasible this is and what we can do as a group of 8 committed individuals to just promote people to build these secondary suites. We think there's great value in that, particularly for seniors. A senior can downsize from their big house, live on a secondary suite in the same property. They don't need to move very far. It's very easy. They can rent out their home. A family can also build a secondary suite for an elderly parents, have them live nearby, but not too nearby. So we think that there could be a lot of benefits through this, and we want to explore how to promote it. Also attended a Sunshine Coast Affordable Housing Society meeting. Their Shaw Road development is moving along nicely. They have zoning approval for that now. And I just want to mention that the town of Gibsons has provided $400,000 in cash to that project and $1.6 million in land to that project. So that $2 million kind of gives you an idea of what we need to do to really make more affordable housing happen. Thankfully, we have a couple committed groups in Sechelt, namely the Lions at Green Court and the Sunshine Coast Community Services. But that's what Gibsons is doing to do it on their own initiative. So just something to think about. And talking to them, they seem really grateful that the housing needs assessment is proceeding. They have a need for better data, and that's going to provide them, hopefully, with a lot of that good data. And that was recently awarded to Urban Matters, who has some local perspective, which is another valuable thing. That's all I got.
Thank you. Councillor Toth.
You can circle back to me for the SCRD board report afterwards. I'm going to keep mine substantially shorter. I just want to say Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to council, staff, gallery, anybody who might be listening. And if you see me out and about in town, you can absolutely wish me Merry Christmas.
All right. Councillor Scott, how about if you go next?
Oh, there we go. Turn off mute. On Sunday, the Harbour Committee and Councillor Toth and Mayor Seegers attended a visit with the Davis Bay Community Association on the wharf, just as a follow-up from the previous request of council to meet with them to see if there's any go-forward items. So we met for about an hour and a half, and there was items that we agreed to disagree on, but for the most part, we set up a plan to go forward with more education, a little bit more advocacy with fisheries. Definitely something that needs to be monitored, but I'm happy with the go forward plan, so be able to see how that goes. And I also want to wish everybody happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and wish everybody a safe travels if they do.
Thank you. Councillor McLean.
Councillor Scott, I just have a question on that. Will there be a report coming back to council just to get some of this recommendations on the Davis Bay Wharf in writing?
Will be some of the recommendations we're going to forward to Public Works. John Devison was there as well, so for sure we can definitely set it up as a report back to council.
Cool, that would be really great if we could have it for the next council meeting in January.
Sounds good.
Councillor Lamb, do you have anything to say?
Yes, I was looking into international business opportunities to try to bring them back to Sechelt. Thank you.
Okay. So we've got Councillor Kuster and Councillor Rowe. Who wants to go next? Councillor Kuster.
I'll keep this pretty low-key like Alton. I went to APC and Matt pretty much talked about the Housing Advisory Committee meeting. I just want to say that is a great group of people and I'm really enjoying being on there. They've got a lot of great ideas and yeah, it's been great. And as far as that, went to 3 Christmas parties and dealing with grad raffle tickets, 7 hours on Sunday. So glad it's over. And I want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas as well. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Rowe.
Nothing really, other than everybody have a restful holiday, and thanks to staff for the great Christmas party. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate all the work that went into it. And we'll see you next year.
Thank you. Okay, couple of things. We did, Councillor Toth will talk about the budget meetings. They were 3 long days and interspersed with District of Sechelt stuff too. So it was, I think I talked to some of the other directors and most of us slept about 12 hours on the weekend just catching up. I attended a vital signs workshop put on by the Community Foundation. They've come out with their vital signs report, and they've recognized that there are some items that have seen decreases or increased use, something like the food bank, etc. So there are 3 things that they've identified that they want to focus on: mental health, housing affordability, and food security. So they have $80,000 that they give away each year, approximately $80,000, besides the separate specific grants, et cetera, that are set up. This is the Community Foundation themselves. They have about $80,000 that they give out. What they've been doing in previous years is giving out grants of $7,500 maximum with that money. What they've chosen to do now is they're going to split their $80,000 into 2 types of grants. One will be the $7,500, but the other could be up to $40,000. And if they're looking to have collaboration or partnerships, and it could be a grant up to 3 years. So what the workshop was about was actually bringing together various groups that would typically have applications in one of those areas to see if there could be some synergies and perhaps some collaborative grant partnerships put together. So that was part of the workshop, actually. It was a whole morning we were there, and they were looking at how could we apply for housing affordability, for example, with 3 different groups that would actually move something forward. So we came up with some ideas. They're going to be looking for those. Deadline for applications is February 28th. You do not now need to have attended the workshop in order to apply. So if there's anybody out there who has some kind of project that they would see something happening within mental health, housing affordability, or food security, check out the Community Foundation website for that grant. A number of us took part in the kettle campaign for the Salvation Army. Yeah. So I know these 2 took pictures and posted them everywhere. I didn't take any pictures, but I was out there doing that. The regional district had a board and staff potluck. So we've been doing various things with the staff at the regional district. It's new. I have to tell you, it's new at the regional district to have this happen. So we're pleased that we're actually getting invited to stuff, and they welcome us being there. And again, the District of Sechelt Christmas party was a lot of fun. On the weekend, I handed out certificates to the Banner Award winners. Each year, the elementary schools take part in having their children, their students, design a banner. And then they are judged by artists who have background, and they get a certificate, and then over the Christmas break, those banners are painted and they get put up in Rosina Giles Way, right out here by the library and Municipal Hall. So I was pleased to give them out. If you want to see what they look like, you can go by the Art Center. They've got samples up there. And the kids were thrilled to get these certificates and happy to see them. On Monday night, we had an elected women's gathering. It's the second one since the election happened. Just getting the women who have been elected on the Sunshine Coast together for supper. We pay for it ourselves, but it's just an opportunity for us to get together and say, you know, what's working, what's not working, what can we do to support each other. And then just before this meeting here tonight, I was actually in the library. A few of you saw me come in with my house coat on. They wanted me to wear my pajamas. I said no. But they had, it's PJs with stuffies in the library. So some of the children came, they brought their teddy bears. One guy brought a snake. We've got, mine was a chicken. So we put names on them, and we sat and did some stories, etc. And then the stuffies are staying in the library overnight. And in the morning, they're going to have pictures of what these stuffed animals got up to. They'll be doing a PowerPoint presentation. They're going to be sending it out on Facebook, and the kids can come the next day and see the pictures and pick up their stuffed animals. So they were excited. They didn't really want to stay themselves, but they're okay leaving their stuffed animal there. Then finally, thank you to council and staff. It's been a great year. I tell you, we're all, I think, looking forward to a break. And we'll come back with renewed energy and focus and more projects in the new year. So thank you for all you've done. It's been great working with this group here and great working with staff. So have a great holiday. So over to Councillor Toth, SCRD.
Let me start by saying I'm really glad round one budget is over. My SCRD report, I'm trying to figure out what's pertinent information to share with everybody. And my report today is 3 pages long. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to pull some highlights out of it. I'll print you a copy later, Pam. There was discussion at the budget meeting on December 5th, 6th about whether planning revenues were enough to cover the costs of the planning staff of the regional district. Do we need to look at increasing the fees there? There's $125,000 was approved for a website redesign, including content, navigation, open data support, apps, the ability to increase engagement directly on the platform, which is good because there was also discussion of money for an engagement platform, so they might be able to do it all at once. A lot of base budget increase requests. They're due to status quo budget without even incorporating inflationary costs since 2011. So they've got a lot of projects that they've fallen behind on. $10,000 for equipment and training to look at servicing electric vehicles as they're added to the regional district fleet. $10,000 entered into round 2 budget for a housing conference to be funded from regional planning. December 6th was pretty much all water. We looked at whether the regional district sets a certain amount of money aside every year to do water mains for replacing old failing mains. A lot of them are asbestos cement. At the current budget level, it could take past 2030 to fund the work. So we were discussing either a $325,000 or $650,000 increase to that work to speed it up before they fail. We also did $250,000 for UV treatment upgrades at the Chapman Water Plant. Right now there is no redundancy. So if the system fails or goes offline for some reason, we don't have UV disinfection up there. There was incorporation of the Sechelt water meters into the round 2 budget, which are going to have to be funded through a long-term loan, either through AAP or a full referendum. We have not made any decisions on which way that's going yet. Approval of $50,000 for doing a study on reducing our environmental flow needs on Chapman Creek. The ability to change the EFN to a lower level could have a substantial impact on our water deficit for not a whole lot of cost. So that's really exciting to see. The SCRD is looking at purchasing 5 water tanks that can be used for emergency water supply. They're going to be bringing it back for round 2 with more information about other uses, arena ice making, water supply, fire flows, etc. And they're looking at $10,000 for that. Flynn, so we met with the Ministry of Forests, Lands, Natural Resources, and Rural Development. Sort of get an update on the foundation agreement, provincial referrals process, things like that. There was some discussion about some improvements that might be able to be made in the shared decision-making process. We'll see where that goes. More information is actually available through declaration.gov.bc.ca. I chaired the Planning and Community Development meeting on December the 12th, which I found out from staff is possibly the longest agenda they've put together for a Planning and Community Development meeting, which was interesting. Church Road well. Costs have gone from $4.6 million up to $8.2 million. The cost of drilling a well is only about $200,000. And the rest of the work is related to 2.3 kilometers worth of transmission main. MOTI requires full lane repaving. You can't just patch the road anymore. 12 new BC hydroelectrical poles along with 3-phase power service to supply the pumps. Construction of chlorination treatment We also need to augment creek flows, as it was discovered that an adjacent creek actually goes down as the wells are being pumped. The board recommended proceeding with an accelerated timetable, which could see commissioning completed by July 2021. So we have at least one more year to go, but hopefully not two. And then at board, we had some discussion around motions to forward to AVICC, primarily around abandoned vehicles in the rural areas, styrofoam in our marine environments, road maintenance, and how Modi generally does a poor job of it. Business licensing, some of the rural directors were talking about wanting to ask for regional districts to have business licensing powers. Right now, only one regional district in the province has that power, and it's a separate process you have to go through to apply for that. We passed a borrowing bylaw to cover cash flow requirements until taxation revenue comes in August, and some discussion around service levels and what constitutes a core regional district service, what the government doesn't actually have to provide up there. I was really surprised to hear that the only required legislated services are solid waste, wastewater, and emergency planning. Everything else is technically optional, including our water. So that's my report.
Thank you. Very thorough. They were long days. All right. So I'll move on to council correspondence, item 12.1. Motion to receive the report or the correspondence. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And the second one. This is from Sunshine Coast Tourism, requesting a letter of support for their renewal application for the MRDT, the Municipal Regional District Tax, due in February 1st, 2021. To send a letter of support? Okay, we need a motion. I'll make a motion that we send a letter of support to Sunshine Coast Tourism in response to the request. Seconded. Any comments, questions? All in favor? Thank you. And I think there's no emergency items? Motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you.